Ladies and gentlemen, dear viewers, welcome to the first day of LAMPA Conversation Festival, this year held fully online. The day was kicked in already with many great discussions, but this is the first one from Delphi Studio. It's also only, I guess, the second one to be held in English and supported and organized by EIT Climate Kick Hub Latvia and Riga Technical University, Pasaules Dabas Fonds, and with the help of Embassy of the Kingdom of Netherlands. My name is Edgars Kuzmans, and today we are going to talk about environment and economics. Is there a connection, and where exactly it lays? How are we going to recover from the economic crisis, and is this recovery going to be brown or green? Where does the climate impact on our economy start, and where does it end? And does it have a beginning or end at all, or is it an integral part of every economic process? These are just a few of the questions that will be raised today, and I'm thrilled to have a selection of very dedicated, passionate, and professional experts in the studio to seek for the answers together with me. So you can clap your hands behind the screen, but without any further ado, Mr. Jānis Brizga, environmental researcher and chair of environmental organization Green Liberty.
Hello.
We have Edvards Kušners, advisor to the Council of the Bank of Latvia, but also with some academic background in biology, law, and
Economic affairs.
Economic
Thank
affairs.
you for inviting me.
We also have Davids Stebelis, entrepreneur and business consultant, also works as the coach and mentor for EU Innovation and Technology Climate Kick Entrepreneur Program. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, every discussion needs a foundation. And today these fundaments will be laid by Vice Hermans, freelance expert and consultant on EU funding. Vice, I guess without any further ado, the digital floor, as we say, is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you first of all for the invitation, and thanks everyone for joining the discussion we hope to have now. Let me tell you a few things. All signs are on green. That's how I named my presentation. And I'll give a short overview. I will start with an intro about myself briefly. Then I'll tell something about the EU Green Deal, what's in it for Latvia, what's in it for other member states, and why is all this green? What is this green all about? How is it initiated? How can it be addressed? How can we work on issues which are more green, and also through some examples. First, about myself. My name is Vice Hermans. I work already as a long time as a consultant for EU projects. I started out with working on cross-border programs between the Netherlands and Germany. I'm a Dutch national, but living in Latvia since the beginning of this year. And one of the reasons I'm involved a lot in climate and sustainability projects, but one of the reasons for coming to Latvia is also because we wanted to live closer to nature, wanted to have a smaller footprint, and it was easier to set up here rather than in other countries. So that's one of my reasons. And one of the things, I'm not your typical climate activist, you can say. You won't see me much on protests or on climate strikes. I rather work from home office on nature-based solutions, on projects. And that's what I hope to bring over also in this presentation and in this discussion, is that there are a lot of ways in which you can make real green projects and really generate green projects. And I hope to inspire some of you to do more about climate, do more about environmental-based projects yourself by joining groups, by joining projects on this basis. So let me tell you a bit more about the EU Green Deal, which is one of the foundations, I think, for the discussion, how it was triggered. It's not only related to climate mitigation or adaptation and things like that. It has to do with biodiversity. It has to do with a lot of other issues also. So a lot of these issues are integrated, to my opinion. So it's not only climate loss, which we are talking about, it's also biodiversity loss. It's also the whole environment, the use of resources, which we are talking about when we talk about green economy, when we talk about green recovery. So something more about the EU Green Deal. It has several aspects, like the farm to fork strategy, which is being more in detail discussed in other sessions during LAMPA. I understood on Friday, for example. Another one, which is very important, is the Biodiversity Strategy from the EU. They really want to do a lot on what they call eco-restoration. For example, rivers which are being brought back to nature, allowing fish to migrate more readily along rivers. Also more about landscapes and nature. And as I put let's say, some words on landscape, especially also later on in the presentation, because it's more integrative. It's not only about the nature, the biodiversity in a landscape, it's also about the people living there and how they work and how they can get a living, which is a better living from a landscape which is rather natural. The circular economy is also one of the aspects. Energy, water, health, they're all related actually. Drinking water, healthy water has to do a lot with climate change, loss of water, or restoring or keeping water, maintaining water, retaining water is a very important issue. Health, many of the problems with COVID had to do with biodiversity loss also. Another thing about the EU Green Deal is the budget itself, which is now being agreed upon, and the green recovery, the recovery fund, which is now set up. New programs are to start in 2021, but if you look at the EU budget, many of the projects will only start 2 or 3 years later. So what we hope is with the recovery fund, which should be green, that these projects can start sooner. So that's what I would like to do, is also, and my advice to everyone, to see if you can start these projects much sooner. From the budget, at least 30% is for climate action, but it's also important that it also goes to other issues on biodiversity. Push and pull, I think it's also a very important point. There will be a lot of minimum requirements when you build a project, like that you have to take care with climate and with biodiversity, but also a lot of chances that if you do more, if you generate more impact, then you can really score more points, you have much more better chances that a project gets approved. So if you focus on issues like health and water and green, you have much more chance to get approved on EU project, and the same goes for other green funds. So these are some aspects which I want to mention. What's in it for Latvia? Maybe it's good to look at the Dutch government. They had a policy review of the EU Green Deal at the end of last year. One of the things is going more into climate neutrality. One of the things is focusing on clean and reliable energy. I think all these points which I mentioned here, I won't go through them in detail, are very important also for other countries like Latvia to look at. Why is it so important to go for green? Like I saw in the first quote, it was already in one of my earlier slides, more than 50% of global GDP depends on nature. Not many people realize that. The second quote comes from Climate Kick, actually, from the Director of Sustainable Land Use, Daniel Zimmer. He mentioned 2 years ago, more than 40% of climate measures are or should be nature-based, but only 2% get the attention and get the finance. All the focus goes to technology-based solutions, basically. So that's also a chance which is overlooked a lot, I think, that you look more clearly at landscapes and these kind of things. The discussion about green economy, is there a green growth? Well, I'm not an economist, so I cannot say much about that. Let me go further to some examples. One of the examples is the landscape finance lab. It's actually set up by the World Wildlife Fund together with Climate Kick. It's all about, it's a landscape approach. So it's restoring entire landscapes, but also including the local economy. So looking at how to restore not just the biodiversity as such, but the whole landscape, and also helping the people to have a future. So securing future generations. And I think what they want to do is attract private funding. They say, well, the Paris Agreement was about government funding. I think it was about 20 billion euros, which was agreed upon in Paris. But the trigger was to attract, with this 20 billion, to attract 40 times as much, 50 times as much on private funding. So the attracting of private funding triggered by government funding, by EU funding, I think is a very important aspect. And if you look at it more integrally, so landscape approach, as I said, it's this integrated approach is really much more helpful than just focusing on climate only or on biodiversity only. So I think looking at it from an integrated aspect is very important. Another initiative, which is quite recent, which is just being set up, is called ARC 2030. It's also focusing on continents, on landscapes, on restoring Australia. They're starting with. They're also planning a follow-up project in Europe, which I also hope to be involved in. These kind of things, I think, are important, that you look more integrally at the whole society, at the whole global greening, if you want to do something with finance in future. Another example, nice example, maybe some of you will know, is a book and a website called Drawdown. They brought some 80 solutions, 100 actually, with some new ones involved. And they said, well, you need basically all these 80 solutions if you want to turn draw down the curve of carbon by 2050. You need all these kind of solutions. They are in energy, they're in transport, built environment, but 50% of the top 20 solutions have to do with land use and food chain. For example, regenerative agriculture. For example, reducing food waste. For example, more plant-based diets across the world, across the globe. Not only all the food which is being imported to feed animals, things like that. And they say the cost of that to finance this whole program would be 1% of global GDP until 2050, which is, it sounds a lot, but the savings and profit benefit from it will be twice higher. So that's actually one of the thoughts which a lot of people tend to forget or overlook. If you finance something green, there are opportunities enough to get it to improve it. I'm looking at the time, but a bit.
No worries about that.
Okay. Some examples maybe. Latvia, well, the reason why you moved here has many assets, I think, because there's a relatively high percentage, I would say, of the lands of the country on unspoiled landscapes, unspoiled nature, forests. And if you look at COVID, at post-COVID, I think if you look at people, where do they want to recreate and how do they want to recreate, how will the future tourism look like? I think these kind of natural aspects are very important. So looking for example for hiking infrastructure, cycling infrastructure. I brought a picture from the Netherlands there. That's one thing we miss here. Not that many cycle trails yet, so we're trying to stimulate more of that. We would like to see more of that. Transport solutions is also an aspect. The trolley bus you see here is from a Dutch city of Arnhem, where they actually have a battery in the bus, which is used outside the lines, outside the wired lines. So you can drive with the bus because it stores energy in the battery. You can drive outside of the wires for 10, 15, 20 kilometers. And I'm actually working on a project together with the city of Riga to combine, to exchange between Arnhem and Riga on these kind of solutions. Another nice project I've been working on is about peatland restoration. It's also a nice idea. But many people don't know is that peatlands, peat soils, they have a lot of carbon. They emit a lot of carbon when they are dried out, but they can store a lot of carbon when they're re-wetted. So one of the solutions for that is that they actually in the Netherlands they're already financing farmers who raise the water level on the land so that there's more carbon actually stored in the soil, so they get money for that. Carbon taxes or carbon payments are given to these farmers basically for storing carbon in the soil. Another aspect is that you can grow reeds like the one in the picture on above, and these reeds you can harvest and you can use the fibers in these reeds for biolaminates or for insulation material or even for proteins in food. So these kind of new products, these kind of new services are what green financing is all about. And also when you talk about eco-restoration, there's a direct link to eco-tourism, of course, and to healthy tourism, as I said, with cycling, with walking, but also cultural heritage. For example, the picture below is from Petvale Park. So it's a combination of arts and recreation and tourism and landscape, restoring landscape. So I think these are important aspects which I wanted to mention. Maybe one which I mentioned in the slide earlier briefly. If you talk about these climate solutions, it's not only just about if you talk about nature-based solutions, planting forests, you need more. You need, for example, regenerative agriculture. You need these landscape solutions such as peat landscapes, which you also want to restore. So you need a more holistic approach if you really want to do something about climate and biodiversity in your projects. So that was basically, in short, what I want to tell you.
And as your slide says, let's discuss.
Yes.
Everything that you mentioned before. Before moving on into the discussion, I guess the viewers back home have just as many questions as the gentleman here in the audience, and I've written down a few of them as well. But you back home, you do have a possibility to ask questions to ask, so please go to take your mobile devices or open your laptop and write menti.com. And if you do so in menti.com, you will be able to put down a number. The number is 4722101, so 4722101. And you will be able to ask some questions also to the gentleman here in the audience. And at the end of the discussion, so once in a while, I will look into also my mobile device to check how many questions we have raised from our viewers. But getting back to your presentation, and actually, we're going to come back to your presentation, I think, several times during today's discussion. But getting back to the name of this discussion, to the general topic, environment and economic recovery. What's the connection there? To understand the status quo in this room, at least, not generally. A question to all of you, gentlemen: how connected? A very broad question. I do understand that. A very broad question, but to understand the status quo, how connected are our financial systems and environmental problems? If you could measure it in a scale from 1 to 10, how connected actually, in your perspective, are the existing financial systems and the environmental issues? Speaking about finances, I guess your number could be kind of the guiding light to all of us.
I think, speaking about finances, there has been a major shift in thinking in financial world over the COVID time. This has not been so easy to notice so far, but I think we are really facing a slow but tectonic shift. And what does it mean, and why I'm talking about it very much is based on what's going to be found on business media, for example, Financial Times, not just our experience from Bank of Latvia, definitely not. But big investment companies are starting to perceive climate risk as an investment risk. So at first, we have to narrow this to climate risk as far as it's related to financial wealth so far. It's mostly because what happened over the COVID is that people saw that finally there is economic crisis that's not generated by economic mistakes or imbalances in economy, but by some external force that's actually natural force, it's virus, that's not manageable by economic or policy decisions, that's not manageable in any, let's say, geographic terms, and that somewhat triggered thinking that there might be other risks of same nature. And the most obvious risk that has been recognized that is actually climate risk. And when you see how it really works in practice, then you easily realize that also climate risk might be of the same nature, and it's really great loss for financial world. So it's very interesting that it happened. Now the tiny virus really made this shift. What does it mean in practice? At first, there are more and more money flowing into the green financial instrument, whether these are stocks of certified companies like ESG certification, etc., or these are green bonds. And this is outflow money out of brown sector, out of brown bonds, because people see that there is a risk, just risk to keep money there. What this means in foreseeable future, I think we'll see not billions as it's been so far, but trillions of funds going into green economy, and I'm afraid that it might end up with a green bubble, because it's very easy to end up with misperception, with let's say fake green offer in the market. Such bubbles easily collapse, and the major damage is that this will damage true green companies, because when stock markets collapse or other financial type of financial crisis strikes, then the companies may be damaged severely and up to the bankruptcy. So my point is that we are now turning from let's say thinking about green stuff as something that's let's say marginal into mainstream, but this mainstream is not regulated, it's not well thought over, there is a little true green passion behind it. Just because there is money, there is profits. The profits over, let's say, the green bonds have been up to 90% higher than benchmarks. So there is just good money. So there is simple incentive for investors to put money in, and there is big incentive for a market to offer green something. And I'm worried that this green something will be fake green. Even now, ESG certification, according to some estimates in third world countries and developing world, 1/3 is fake. That means you are investing green that's not really green. And this is a big difference. In financial world, you don't see so well what's behind, where is the real economy. It's like what happened over the previous financial crisis. It's just securitization up to incredible level and ending up with bubble. The green stuff should be managed much better. So what I want to say, that we have to be very careful about the substance, about the way how it's certified, how it's controlled, how it's monitored, what are the reporting requirements for companies, to be sure that the real green receives money and fake green is squeezed out of the market. So far, we are not ready at all for this, and the money is starting to flow.
Quite surprised that straight away with the first question we found the elephant in the room. And speaking about like the true sense of the problem, green bubble, I think is the elephant just mentioned. And when you said these words, I saw quite a few notes being taken down. So I'm sure we're going to come back to the green bubble. But speaking about true green and fake green, as you mentioned so nicely, true green, Jani, as from a true green perspective, so how would you see the current connection between the financial systems and the environmental issues. So how strong is it?
Yeah, I think in many cases it's not very easy to distinguish which is green and how green it is. You know, you could say about there is 50 shades of green. You know, that's all possibilities, and from dark green to very, very brownish green, and there is a lot of science looking at that. In many cases, it's about the marginal things. You know, what kind of shopping bag I should choose? Is it the best to have the plastic one, or use it several times, or paper one? Most of the economic activities have impact on the environment. Either it's paper or plastic. It's all of them have environmental impacts, and I think this is one of the big challenges for to have this balance between economic activities and natural capital, which we all depend on, because economy is just a tool to provide some kind of services. It's not the aim in itself. And all these economic activities, as I mentioned, are using natural resources, producing waste and pollution. And how to balance it, it's not very easy if we don't want to change the economic paradigm which we are now living in. So as it was mentioned, the move to the greening of economy might end up with the situation with the bubble or just fake greenwashing is been around for decades, when companies are trying to show up that their products or their image is greener than its reality. So to have this absolute decoupling of economic growth and resource consumption and pollution, it's very complicated, and we don't have many good examples. Only in few cases, for example, air pollution and urban development. Most of the new cities have much better air quality than it was 100 years ago. But if we compare biodiversity, climate change, economic growth continues, and climate change grows, biodiversity loss is continuing. So we don't really see good ways how to deal with these issues, how to keep this idea of green growth, how to have both economic growth and environmental protection in absolute terms, not just in one case, one small place, but in general. So yeah, I would play the pessimist maybe here in this room then.
And what card will an entrepreneur in this room play?
I believe there is quite a big disconnection between green and business, business and finance, especially when you consider clean tech or environment friendly or this type of business. In fact, there are a number of different perspectives how we can talk about the issue. It was 2 years ago. I have been doing quite a lot of visits in Europe, having discussions with different investment funds, which was majority of them were corporate investment funds. And there was a senior vice president to whom we have been talking to, and we have had this discussion about how much does it really matters to be green for the investment fund. And his answer was quite clear, that don't never ever mention that you are green, because every age green investment gives you smaller margins. And I think and this is the case still in majority of Europe. I don't see that there are a number of different funding opportunities or financial instruments which are really privileging green businesses. Right now, I think we are somewhere, as previously said, we are somewhere in the beginning when we talk about it, when we think about it, where we have some first movements, but we still lack action on this one. There are, of course, European initiatives when we talk about European grant programs, which are very much dedicated to build new green businesses. In this case, yes, we see that there is a good development. Number of new companies are established, or maybe some established companies build new kind of verticals where they are introducing new technologies which are sustainable and more human health or socially more responsible. Nevertheless, I think we are in a baby seat right now on this one. I would say that the disconnection, it's quite, we are in this type of discourse where we discuss green, but at the same time when I talk to people who are doing business on a regular basis, in fact majority of them doesn't really know what does green means. They have no kind of those measurements, how you can assess, do you do a green business or you don't? What you should do differently to make it more green? And I think the overall awareness in this entrepreneurial society is quite low, and this is something which we should really change, because it really matters how much people know about what they should know, and right now the knowledge is quite limited. So yeah, my answer is that there is, in my understanding, there is a big disconnection between finance and green. And right now, if you ask yourself a question, how much of the business projects, like investment projects in Latvia, are financed because they are green, majority are financed because they are profitable. And there are only a few banks in Europe right now who do assessment of environmental impact before they do assessment of financial results. And I think this is something that should be changed, but the system is like every system. It will take around 10 or 15 years, and it's a very slow process.
But you mentioned the disconnection. From your perspective, does the disconnection between both of these segments, does it exist due to the lack of common ground, or due to just a bad translation? Let's put it this way.
I think we are somewhere in, we don't know what we don't know right now, and I think there should be much more emphasis done on building overall awareness about what does the climate problem means, because especially when you live in Latvia, I don't know, it's historically, we are like in a place where you don't feel really problems with water quality, problems with air pollution, and those type of problems. You don't see it, you don't feel it, and for entrepreneur in Latvia, you really have to it's quite hard for you to come up with something innovative in a field of green innovations. For example, if you don't feel a pain every day.
Yes.
But on this, I think it will take less than 10 or 15 years for regulatory reasons. There are already very clear decisions made and approaching new decisions in Europe in particular as regards reporting on these issues, in particular environment, social governance, the CSG. Investors will be forced to report on their portfolios in these terms. It means in return they'll have to ask this reporting from the companies listed in the stock market. So there's a big difference with the Latvian business that's usually out of capital market. They go for money only to the banks. But also there's good news about banks, because sooner or later, and I think so sooner, it will be incorporated in so-called stress tests to the banks, the environmental impact. That means banks at first will be discouraged to invest into brown projects. Then they have choice whether to keep money out of economy, what they're doing in Latvia quite often, unfortunately, or they invest more in green. And this regulatory framework will force financial world to look more into the real economy, into the green economy. So that's why I think it will not take so long. But the problem is, again, with the fake green, because if you're reporting that you're green, you have enough capacity to prove as it is, then you have a lot of, let's say, semi-green stuff already, and then banks feel better, capital markets feel better, and nothing will change in real life. So this is all about how it's regulated, how it's controlled, and what are the standards, and do we know how to draw a line between real change and, let's say, towards sustainability, and how to translate it into business indicators that will further be put into some policy framework.
We have been involved in a discussion in Scandinavia about it, and there was discussion was led by the pension fund, and overall the question was, who is the gatekeeper? Like, who is keeping the gate to make it green or make it brown? And the pension fund was very clear. We are, because the internal policy of the pension fund was about very clearly defining what type of standards, investment standards they have to follow when they do investment, and the majority of investment was into real estate projects, and they have very precisely defined what type of standard requirements should those projects should fulfill, like, and this was about how we can make investments into sustainable, like, building development, and I think this is an example. Nevertheless, I have been reading some latest articles about Latvia. Public procurement, right? Publiskais iepirkums. In Latvia, it's about 19% of GDP goes to public procurement, and the question is how green the public procurement is right now, because we know there is a regulation about green public procurement, but nevertheless we know that it's still brownish, or brown. I don't know, somewhere between. I think this is something what we can tackle very well, in fact, because in fact Latvia is very much responsible about how they manage public procurement. I have been reading and listening some discussion in China how do they fight about this problem, because this is a problem what you can do, like, or change in a domestic market very well, in fact. And in China provinces, they give power, and the public procurement is like very well organized. In fact, that they ask every company who is participating to deliver facts and results regards of green impact. And I think this is something that we can do easily if there is a political support.
This is,
I think it's important. Yeah.
this is a massively important issue, because what you mentioned is that, and we are proudly saying how much percentage of the public procurement is actually going through a green procedure, etc. But wouldn't it be? And you mentioned years. In how many years? So in how many years do you guess we will reach the mindset where at least a shade of green is part of every public procurement as a standard? And you measure every, no matter how brown it is, but there's a shade of green in it as you know, as basically a part of it from the beginning. So where do you see such future?
Well, I think there's let's turn it around a bit. I think there's a very important role there for organizations like the EU, but also national governments, to take the lead. For example, I already mentioned in the discussion a year ago with the EU about cycling and walking, for example. If the EU would say, well, if you invest in developing a city in a new way, in a more natural way, you get, in Latvia, you would get 75% for urban renewal from EU for a project. If you add 10% to that, if you say you get 85% from the EU instead of 75%, if you include water storage, more green, more trees, more cycling, more walking, more public transport, things like that, then you get more money from the EU. That would be a very first help to trigger this. Then automatically the private funding will follow. We also had examples from the EU project, for example, where it was about traffic. It was called shared space. Because the layout was changed of a road, the shopkeepers said, we were afraid we would attract less people with cars, but actually it looks much better. Let's invest in our shop fronts. Now we can attract more people, actually, more visitors to our shops, because it's more green, it's more lively, it's a different type of development. So these type of issues can really trigger the market.
But do you believe that the current government systems in EU countries, and especially then in Latvia, are ready for the change that is coming from the EU? If we talk about circular economy and biodiversity strategy, so are the systems ready for that?
Yeah, I think the systems could be ready or are. I don't know about the specific Latvian situation right now. Don't live that long here, but let me give you another example. I think the mindset of the people who are in charge in the government is also important. For example, the Dutch Ministry of Defense has said 2 years ago, we want new suits for our army, but we want them to be circular. So those who want to supply the new uniforms, they have to take in the old uniforms and give us an idea what they do with it. So some designers came up with the idea to make them into tents or things like that. And only because of that, because of those ideas, because of making it more circular, they won the tender. They won the procurement. I think these kind of ideas, which come from persons rather than from the whole government structure, is important to keep in mind. So really, it's changing mindset of people believing in these ideas of greening the economy rather than only the government. So we have to do it from both sides. It's not only the government who can trigger this.
I can comment on green procurement and because we've been working with the regulation quite a lot during the last, I don't know, almost 10 years, I think, and there's been a lot of improvement. And if you look, for example, on paper as a product which governments are still procuring for, most of the paper is you can call it green because it's from recycled, it's non-chlorine bleached and so on. So in some of the sectors, there's been a significant change in what you are procuring for, and it's not only because of the pressure from the regulation, but just because the market has significantly changed. And if you're buying the cheapest paper, you get the green paper. So there are these changes in the market where you can see, but at the same time, in some other sectors, the flexibility is very, very limited. For example, in construction sector, there is guidelines on green procurement and how you should choose, but the costs of investment compared to the life cycle costs of these buildings is a big problem, because in many cases green is more expensive in the beginning, and then you save during the life cycle of the building, but that's not the part of the government calculations on we have only very limited amount of money, so we buy the cheapest, and at the end you pay more because the building is not so energy efficient and so on.
Just adding, I think the construction building industry is right now they don't have mandatory, right? It's it's a recommendation, and I think this could be a substantial change because if you change it.
And one more example on repair, which you mentioned. There's been also some projects looking in Latvia for possibilities, for example, when you are renovating school, not to throw out all the old tables and everything, but to renovate them and make a new furniture. And it's very, very complicated to find such an enterprise in Latvia who would do it, because businesses are used to do one thing. If they make a table, they make a table for 10 years, and they're not so flexible to respond to these kind of proposals.
Yeah.
Edward?
Just also answering to your question about do we have systems in place. I think we all have these systems in place since birth. It's billions of neurons behind our skulls. That's only system we have to change, because the proper thinking about the green and about sustainability is a key. And I think that one of the problems is that we are now somehow derailed from time to time by different hype ideas or by partially sustainable ideas just because it seems too interesting or there's money behind. As a one example is the carbon or low carbon economy idea. It's very good when you look at this as a solution for environmental, climate change, because it's all about carbon very much. When you look at emission side, yes, less carbon emission, better for climate. But when you look at the storage side, as we've been already mentioned, we sometimes get derailed by ideas like having very intensive forestry, having intensive farming. It's very good for carbon storage because it grows very fast. When forest stops to grow, you just chop it down and you have a next one. But if you look at sustainability as an old, and maybe it's too much buzzword, but I think it's the only true concept. Then sustainability includes also environment, biodiversity, human health. And then you see that it's not good for biodiversity. So this type of carbon storage is fake green. It may be used in certain cases, but much better is biological agriculture, is different type of forestry, is more forest preserved. We don't have old forests in Latvia at all anymore. The Moritsala Reserve maybe is the last place in Latvia with really true old forest. All the rest has been chopped down with 100 years but no 300 or let's say 200-300-year-old forest. So it's very important that we can keep all these things in our minds in certain system. And when you look at what I can do personally or what somebody can do, even not touching business, but personal life, what are the main problems in Latvia in environment? It's loss of biodiversity, it's decrease of natural habitats, and it's water quality. Only 1/5 of our waters are in good ecologic shape. It means we have serious problems with groundwater pollution, with not ground but above ground, and it ends up with problems with the sea. So what can you do for this? And then you see what people are doing. They said, oh, zero waste shopping, it's very good. Fine, you can take your glass bottle, you go for a shop, but it's about waste. Do we have waste the number one problem in Latvia? No. So what do you do for number one problems? And then it turns out that it's much more important what you shop in your glass bottle rather than in what type of package you put it in. And if you don't have clear understanding how this idea about sustainability ends up in your real life or in business, then you have green bubbles, you have green hype, you have green anything, but not a real change. Because it's very much about how we understand and what we really know about sustainability. And why I stick very much to sustainability, maybe because of I'm a lawyer.
This will be my next question.
It's only one related word enshrined in our constitution. It's something you can use even raising a case in constitutional court. It's way beyond just good and old idea.
And that would have been my next question, because I think this was the first time in today's discussion, 45 minutes into it, where the word sustainability was mentioned. And I guess we know why, knowing that it has lost so much of value nowadays that we in a way try to avoid it. But the other terms that you mentioned, biodiversity loss and climate crisis, both of these two big issues, who are highly interconnected, no question about it. But if our main target is to address the financial world about these issues, what would you say, and again, from your perspective and what would be the gentleman's answer, would you separate both of these terms, issues, problems, and keep them separated as biodiversity loss and climate crisis, or to be better implemented in the financial risk assessments, in the financial culture? Would you combine them as one massive problem that we're dealing with? What would be your suggestion?
Yeah, my suggestion would stick to good old wordings related to sustainability, because it's really all-inclusive concept. When you look at sustainability, definitely climate change the problem, and it's let's say economic problem, and it's how easy it's to sell to business world, because it's your future loss. If climate is changing, there's calculated different trillions of dollars of total global loss. It's easy to sell, but it's only one part of the coin, because the other one is what type of world we're living in, which we would like to live. Because Sahara Desert is a highly sustainable environment. You can eat spiders and dig for water, and it's very stable. It's even expanding. But in Latvia here, with this type of nature, with this type of let's say, land of thousand unfortunately degrading lakes and forests and etc., it needs certain effort to preserve this. And it needs certain changes in agriculture, in forestry, in attitudes, in consumption, because consumption is that drives all the economy. There is only one, let's say, subject all world's economy is serving. It's consumer. If you don't consume, there is no economy behind. So it's all in our minds, and sustainability, to my mind, is the best concept that's all-inclusive, and out of which you can draw all the economic and legal, let's say, ideas, and get rid of these green hypes, just because it's stylish.
And it absolutely works from the law perspective, as you clearly mentioned. But does it work if there is no status quo about the word sustainability, as it is in Latvia, where now we're looking for new terms, how to describe sustainability? It will be hard to translate to you in English, but in Latvian we're currently searching for new terms, how to exactly describe sustainability, so that policymakers, entrepreneurs, the society, and everyone would understand, to reach the status quo.
Well, maybe one example which I mentioned briefly in my presentation is, for example, if you talk about regenerative agriculture, which goes, actually the term regenerative, another word for that is beyond sustainability. Actually, you try to bring back to do more than just sustainable, keeping it intact, but bringing it back, regenerating, in this case, economy or agriculture. If you talk about regenerative agriculture, I don't agree with you when you say carbon is best in intensive agriculture. I would say carbon storage and other issues, such as soil health, such as preserving drinking water, such as helping the local economy, are better preserved in regenerative agriculture and regenerative types of forestry, in which you don't take out all the material and put new, for example, fertilizer in, but instead use a plant cycle in the soil to regenerate the soil, to keep the fertilizer into the soil by using certain plants.
But why I mention this is just because this argument has been used by Latvijas valsts measure when we were discussing should we lower the threshold for trees for clear cutting age, and that's been used by our intensive farmers. They pick up this carbon business idea and they say, yes, that's what we are offering. That's exactly our offer. And it's completely fake. It's not green. It's mold green. It's greenish.
It's brown green.
Yes.
Really.
Yeah. Well, there's a shadow. David, you want to add something?
I was regenerative. You said, yeah.
Yeah.
I believe this is one element of when we talk about the circular economy, and circular economy, I think, is such a broader principle how we should think about economical systems, and I think this is a real challenge for everybody, and this is a challenge because this is a systematic challenge where many different stakeholders are involved. From my perspective, when we teach sustainable business models in university, we typically use triple bottom line principle, which means that you always talk about the economical benefits, because if you don't generate economical benefits, you cannot really care about nature or anybody else. Then the second level is about impact on nature, what type of impact you generate on nature, and the third level is about social impact, what type of impact you generate on the social environment. So this is a triple bottom line principle, and I think this is very simple mechanics how you can think about your business when you are building or redesigning your business to make it more sustainable. I don't have a clear picture about sustainability and carbon neutral economics. I still very favor that when you do something, you always know how much carbon is behind it. And I seen the advertising a few days ago where was it was a business in somewhere in Europe who was which was selling fruit, and on every fruit you have a carbon number. And I think this is something what we should do, because regular consumers need to know how much they produce by making decisions.
But not only carbon. Yeah.
I know, but this is, but you know, this is very simple measure to handle it, I would say.
Yeah. So speaking not only about carbon, what you mentioned was already a quite precise call for action, basically. In order to take decisive action, and getting back to your presentation, are there any segments where financial institutions could or should focus first and foremost, in your opinion? I mean, forests, oceans, freshwater, aquaculture. Are there any segments where the financial world should take a look at first and foremost?
Well, I would rather also talking about the green bubble earlier and the danger of greenwashing when you focus too much on one thing. I would really prefer if the whole sector would look at
systematic change
and look at it holistically. For example, a lot of being done right now about carbon accounting. There's several companies working on how to calculate carbon. A kilogram of CO2 costs, or you would get 25, 75, 85, 100 euros for that. And then you can pay off the carbon loss, for example. If you look at it more holistically, you can say, well, if you look at carbon only, maybe the price is 75 or 50, 75 euros. But if you look at biodiversity loss, and if you calculate social aspects, if you calculate all the other aspects, you can come to a true price, which is much higher. And then you calculate all. And only then you can say you have a true, you work truly on holistic, I would call it carbon accounting. And only then you can really pay a true price to a project. Like I said with the EU example, if they pay more for a project which is more, which does more for society and more for the nature and more for environment, you get a higher percentage. That's the same way you should look at carbon accounting, for example. And I'm working with an organization in the Netherlands. It's called Climate Cleanup. They're working on this system on carbon accounting to try and integrate all the other sustainable development goals into it, to calculate a true price. So I think it's very important to if you look at these kind of things.
We should not kill nature fighting climate change.
No.
Very simple. Very simple.
We should include it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing is our time is rather going to the end of the discussion. We're already in the second part of it. I think that we haven't touched, but is very important as well. Policymakers, institutions, mindset, private financial sector. How do we involve and how do we best use and jumpstart in a way the private financial sector, especially maybe from the perspective of a private entrepreneur, the private banking? How do you see a way there for the private financial sector to become more involved in this?
As I mentioned already, I think that governments will force financial sector into this. What's important that there is also this certification and analysis of the situation, and when you can really not force them into green something, but into real green substance. And I'm more worried not about the fact that it will happen, because it's already going on, but that these green ideas are not, let's say, wasted, and we don't have whether green bubble or just like what we see a lot in old cases is a green hypocrisy right now, like maybe German car scandal. It's a typical example of green hypocrisy. You're saying you're very green and then you just make it fake. And there is a lot of incentives for business just to be green fact because it's easier. And it's important for society that we have instruments to get them back on track. And this is, to my mind, missing part right now. We don't understand very well, and we don't have enough systems to draw lines between what happens in the end with environment, with sustainability, and how it's transferred into business activity. Because here and there different aspects, and we mentioned already carbon. It's one aspect, but it shouldn't be left alone. So there should be something added on, and all administrative system should be installed to control the system, or there should be sufficient self-control in private sector. That I personally don't believe very much. I think the previous financial crisis proves that the self-control is actually impossible.
You mentioned the previous crisis, the financial crisis. How do we avoid the mistakes of the past? Currently speaking about the COVID-19 recovery plan, how do we avoid the mistakes of the past and change the course of economy to be more sustainable then? That is a complicated question, I know.
Yeah.
Well, do you see, gentlemen, that any of the current solutions, financial instruments, could be a solution both for climate crisis and corona crisis? You mentioned the first time we mentioned now the tiny virus in today's discussion. Do you see any instruments that could be both a solution for corona crisis and climate crisis? From all of your perspectives, different ones.
I think these connections between health and environment is getting more clear through the corona crisis, as example. Also, connection between the role of government in making change, I think, is important. Which before, I think we believed much more in the market, that market can regulate everything. Now we can see that market cannot deal with corona crisis, for example. The same way our market cannot deal with the climate change. We need the government as a kind of organization to help us get through these kind of challenges. I think these are some of the lessons which we can take from corona crisis and into the environmental discussion. But of course, there is now we can see that, for example, because of the economic recession, as a result of the corona, all the limitations imposed by governments on transportation and movement and so on, the prices, for example, on oil and everything went down, which actually, I guess you know better that it's limited some of the green business developments in recycling, for example, and other technologies which are less competitive because of the decrease in prices. So there are also many limitations which were brought up by this change in a health situation.
And I think another aspect, or even a depth of this situation is, speaking about biodiversity loss, is the importance of biodiversity for the pharmaceutical industry, which is not mentioned enough, but according to some studies is also a massive loss.
Yeah.
And I liked actually, Janne, that you mentioned before this assumption that the greener the more expensive, a very primitive way to approach the things, but according to some studies, the biodiversity loss is already a massive economic cost. Between 1997, just to stick to some numbers, between 1997 and 2011, the world lost around 4 to 20 trillion per year in ecosystem services due to land cover change, and 6 to 11 trillion per year due to land degradation. So we are already paying for it.
Yeah. Well, it's also what I mentioned. One of the quotes, which is on this Biodiversity 2030 booklet from the EU, it says, more than 50% of the worldwide GDP depends on nature. So if once you try to once this loses, once you start losing on that, you directly affect your economy in all aspects. So you should take this into more and more into account. A lot of people don't realize that, I think, these connections. Another one, which I also mentioned briefly in my presentation, was also about COVID, basically. That because of biodiversity loss, viruses, for example, which come out of a natural forest, go looking for new hosts where they can live. So they come from the natural forest, they come to the surrounding area. So they spread out into the countryside, into the cities. And that's how COVID, through maybe even through animal farming, we don't know exactly, how COVID actually came into our lives. You can say it was also through biodiversity loss.
Exactly.
At least
That's another way to
indirectly.
put it, right?
At least indirectly. And the other aspect is turning it around. We talk about economic recovery at the moment. Why is it called recovery fund? Also by the EU. It's recovery after COVID crisis. So if you want to call it a real recovery fund, you should do two things. You should look at where the origin comes from, which is partly also at least biodiversity loss. You should also look at addressing it directly and as soon as possible. If you look at the EU budget, it means the projects will start in 2 or 3 years. No, you want to start now. So the EU should look at organizations like World Wildlife Fund, like others, like people who work on all kind of natural-based solutions for direct recovery on the crisis. So there should be a call, let's say, maybe not next week, but at the end of this year, at very latest, already by the EU, calling for people to come with ideas for projects. Not wait till 2021 or 2022 for that. So these kind of things you should keep in mind. Yeah.
In this case, I'll be skeptical because knowing very well the nitty-gritties of this assistance, it should be spent in a few years. That means you need already prepared project today to have capacity to invest into the project. And actually, all we can do is to quickly gather all the projects that are already somewhere in the shelves and drawers, and to spend this money. Otherwise, it will be just lost. That means that most of the money will go for roads and all old school stuff. Just to be very pragmatic on how it's set by EU, it should be spent very quickly. Most of the money will go for Southern Europe, and already you see in many analytics saying it will be just a waste of funds. I think we shouldn't stick too much to COVID. COVID is good exercise, just changing minds and learning that things might happen in the world very quickly and at a large scale. But again, COVID will teach us many things, but what you mentioned about environmental losses, it's more about compassion, being a part of richest part of the world, and not so much impacted as many sub-Saharan or Asian countries. We always feel better so it's not our problem. We shouldn't care about it. I think this is let's say very sad, but I think it's not enough just to say there are big losses, because these losses usually occur in other areas. But there is one interesting research that somehow not very much being promoted by public administrations, I think, for certain reasons. It's been done by one Israeli scientist in if I'm not mistaken, a French institute. They tried to find correlation between mortality of COVID and different, let's say, factors. And only one factor that showed any meaningful correlation was quality of air. So the quality of air influences health of lungs and immune system of people. And it ends up that exactly in the regions where we're high pollution, there are first sparkles of COVID. If you look at the air pollution map of Europe, you see north of Italy, Benelux, London. So
in USA, New York City.
Yeah, London. No, I'm talking about Europe.
Oh, okay.
Yes, certainly it's New York. Certainly it's also big metropolis in the southern America, etc. That teaches something. That even in such case we have direct lines between environmental quality and quality of life in that. But I think it's for most governments it's an unpleasant conclusion. But it's official, let's say, publication, scientific publication. It's not some fake news.
And not to get stuck on the certainly very important COVID issue, but to move on to the broader spectrum that we try to achieve today. A question already from the audience, and let me remind that every one of you listening to us online, back home, wherever you're sitting, hopefully in a green and clean environment, if you go to menti.com and put the number 4722101, so 4722101, you are able to send us some questions directly here in the studio. We have received a few of them already, and the first one is to Mr. Kušners, as it's said here exactly. A question directly to you. You said that you're afraid that we could end up with this green bubble that we already mentioned, basically the first issue that we attacked today. So who should be in charge of determining what is real green? The governments, NGOs, anyone else? A question to you, but I guess everyone could add up their own opinion. So who could be the decisive organization or structure to check the real green behind it?
At first, in the ideal world, it would be just common sense. But if you look at who has...
The most uncommon thing in the world, as we know.
Yes. But if you look at who has sufficient power to influence things, then these are public administrations, and rules set by public administration for private sector, maybe delegating something to private sector, but this is the true force behind changes. Or we look at consumers and just, guys, change our consumer behavior and things will change immediately without any government regulation. So there are two ways. Both are open, but I'm, with my experience in public administration, I'm looking for these more compulsory measures as in short term more efficient.
Gentlemen, anything to add on the who should be the one in charge?
From those initiatives which I have been seeing around the world, I believe NGOs. From my experience, they are providing a competence level needed, because when you work in a governmental sector or some state institutions, it's not your focus. In fact, I think the competence, the expertise comes from NGOs, and they have to be involved into the how we measure, how we track, how we assess. All those principles should come from NGOs.
I would certainly agree with NGOs, but I think research also has an important place to play, to understand, kind of to have these measures and to try to quantify these impacts in a way. It's not very easy. It's rather complicated. It depends on the metrics which you are using and so on and so on. But there are tools you can use to quantify impacts on biodiversity, on social issues, and on climate.
And support from politics, from national governments, from EU, from UN, giving guidelines on how to work on these. For example, if you only talk about eco-restoration, for example, one of the examples I mentioned, it's not just by making a nature park where you cannot do anything. It's also about giving people who live there a livelihood as a maintainer of the area, or as farmer, but then extensive farmer, or supporting them to develop sustainable tourism. There it's not enough if, let's say, the NGO only, while World Wildlife Fund by itself would say, well, we want a natural area. It's you would leave them only to look at the nature. Probably they come up with something different than already is happening now. For example, with what I mentioned, the example of this landscape finance lab, which looks at the landscape. So it also includes livelihood of the people who live in that area. That they can work as a ranger in the national park, that they can organize tourist trips, they can work as a farmer, but then only extensively, and then maintain the landscape. And that way also keep the biodiversity and the nature within this landscape intact. I think therefore you need both NGOs and the government, for example, who can facilitate, can support.
And not only both, but what we hear from you is basically everyone. Again, to play the game, we need everyone to get involved.
It's complex, but you need them all. You do need them all. You need
including education.
Including education.
So, yeah, a question from the audience, a very important one, exactly. Yeah. And I would like to, it's not for you, but I would like to address this one for you about perfect examples. So first of all, which of the European countries could be the role models to check the real green living and focus? So do you have any role models in Europe? And another one, more of a comment. A perfect example is Netherlands and Germany. That's another comment. Perfect example is Netherlands and Germany as with special education about environment, and Netherlands as with cutting off car usage. Can we apply something similar here?
I think we don't have one single role model for everything. I think in Netherlands you could find beautiful examples with cycling and compared to driving the cars and so on. But if you look at the Dutch footprint in general, it's 5 times bigger than it should be. So it's a lot to do, and bigger than here in Latvia. Yeah. So it's a lot to do to really go to real green, if we can say so. So I think in each of the countries you can find some good examples. But the problem is that these are the one example there, another example there, but I wouldn't say any of these countries are 100% green in a way. Latvia has been called one of the greenest countries in the world, no? But if you look deeper, then you understand it's very far away from that.
None of the Western world countries can do this, because otherwise we would not be in the problem. We would not discuss about it. We just say, oh, guys are doing they are rich and green, and it's fine.
Yeah.
It's not so easy, because the old Western consumption ideology and type of economy we have, it's oil based, it's consumption based, it's fast everything, use and drop.
And there's so many aspects also, because if you look at, let's say, the statistical tables, you would see that the Netherlands and Germany are definitely not on front on everything. Actually, for example, the Netherlands is lagging behind on energy. It's very low on the list on renewable energy, whereas Latvia is almost on top, because here there's quite a lot of hydropower and quite a lot of biomass, which is produced in forests, which is partly used also in heat for heat energy in cities. So these kind of things you have several role models. I would say for several factors.
Speaking about Netherlands, which is a close topic to you, of course, for some reasons. I found a very nice quote of a gentleman, and I think this quote gives even more color to something that you said a while before, getting back to your presentation. So I'll read it to you first, and then I'll say who is the author of it. Climate-related risks are a source of financial risks, and dealing with financial risks is part of our mandate. Therefore, the way financial firms deal with climate change and climate change-related risks is very much within our mandate. The author comes from the Netherlands. Do you have at least a clue from which field he's coming?
Maybe from the banking sector?
Quite precise. That's actually Frank Elderston, executive board member of the Netherlands National Bank.
Yeah, I thought I read
it. It's a lovely quote where he explains to the society, to all the stakeholders basically, that this is very much of their mandate to deal with these financial risks. Yeah. But our time is slowly running out. But another thing that I would like to ask related to this question is, several times he mentioned the word, in this quote, he mentioned the word risk. So to sum up everything that we said today and that was mentioned, and this clearly is a discussion not for 1.5 hours, but for 1.5 days at least, from your individual perspectives, an NGO basically, national bank advisor from the government's point, expert, advisor as well, private entrepreneur, where do you see the biggest risks? You mentioned several of them, but if you have to highlight, where do you see the biggest risk or the biggest hurdle that we have to overcome to get to the result where everyone would play in the same league and the status quo would be achieved? Lietse?
Well, maybe the underestimation, as I said, of, for example, nature-based solutions. So that you focus too much, as we said earlier, on only carbon, or you focus too much on only technology alone will save us, or something like that. That's not the point. You should really look into the system, the whole system, not only the system of nature, but also the system of banking, the system of finance. You should look at all aspects in society which could cause a risk. So you shouldn't focus too much on one thing and say, oh, we done this climate issue, so now we are saved. No, there's a lot more going on. You have to look at, as you also said, look if the climate solution does not do something against, let's say, nature or against society. So you should really have a holistic view, in this case also of carbon accounting, as it could be a good measure of these risks. So look into it from an overall perspective. Look at all the sustainable development goals of the UN. Look at all the societal aspects of sustainability, of regenerative economy, circular economy.
The bigger picture.
The bigger picture, yeah.
Edward?
Agreeing to what we've mentioned, and I'll start just a new page for the last minute. It's poverty and inequality. We'll stop. Otherwise, another 2 days.
All right.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems is overconsumption of resources and the way we live our lives. So trying to use efficiency improvements and technologies as a solution, I think, is very, very limited. I believe we need more, social innovations which helps us to change the way how we organize society and what we can call good life. Because if you look at some glossy journals, the good life is a bigger car, bigger house, and things like that, which actually leads to this overconsumption and this material competition between people to get more and more and more and more. And that's not an environmental issue anymore. It's kind of social issue on how we see our aim in a society.
And do you believe an issue that was mentioned here, or actually a solution, adding a price tag to everything and adding the real price tag, not only talking about, as you mentioned, carbon, but the full price tag, would that be at least part of the solution?
That's one thing, trying to calculate in terms of euros and dollars all the ecosystem services in nature. But I think this is the way how to play with the game, because the financial game is the most important. All the decisions in government is made according which is more profitable, which decision. So trying to calculate the nature into the financial terms, I think, is a way how we now try to sell the environmental protection. But you can also have different values compared to the monetary values. So that's a different way of looking at what is important. Not to look through how much does it cost, or to have some different value for measuring and comparing things. I think is also important. Not to just stick to the euro as an ultimate value for everything we do.
David?
Final thought. I think that there is a big responsibility behind the state institutions right now, because they can do the soft touch or they can do the hard touch.
That's right.
My biggest risk is behind that they will do the soft way, because there is a lot of out of the comfort to do it hard way, which means I think we can lose this opportunity during next few years when we discuss how we can make public procurement more green. And I think this is something what can be done really right now, right there, and make immediate impact. And my specific attention is into infrastructure projects. Nevertheless, I agree with you. There are a lot of good progress done. I think the infrastructure, where the majority of money goes, and I think the construction industry takes around 50% from the public procurement right now, should face it. And when we do energo efficiency projects or similar ones, we should care about what type of materials we are using, how much waste we generate by that, and how the waste is regenerated into something else. And I think this is the hard way how we should do it, because it will have a sustainable impact over the long term. From the small business perspective, I think my ideal utopic world would be that I would say that the state, when the state gives some financial support, and typically in many cases there is a financial support when you start some new initiatives or you reframe your business or redesign it, you should gain more benefits if you can really give positive impact to environment or social aspect. So, which means that there should be more privileges to the businesses which are keen to give more impact on environment and social.
And truly green, real green.
And real pricing,
Hopefully.
as you mentioned, yeah.
Hopefully.
And education.
Gentlemen, it really is an issue, or a combination of issues that really needs more time than 1.5 hours. But I think our planet is thankful for you to come here today. Really, your passion, your expertise, and your knowledge, and your previous experience in this field really gives us a good guiding light into the whole situation. We have a common goal to achieve, and as it was already addressed several times, only together it can be achieved. So let me sum it up with another quote by James Gorman, the CEO of Morgan Stanley Group, who once said, and this was not very long time ago, it was just last year, before the corona crisis, but still, if we don't have a planet, we're not going to have a very good financial system. And that's, I think, something that we all agree with. So thank you all for watching as well. Get involved with NGOs or any other field that you're working in, because this is a common field of action. And remember that nature is too big to fail. Thank you for watching, and keep on enjoying LAMPA.